"I'm not enough," she whispered, and Emma Stone's voice cracked. One of Hollywood's most successful young stars was about to confess her life's darkest secret, looking straight into Oprah's eyes. The silence in the Chicago studio was deafening. Outside, the February wind rattled the windows, but inside, time seemed suspended. For 30 years, Oprah had witnessed countless revelations, but something about Emma's trembling hands and the way her emerald eyes darted away from the camera told her this was different. This wasn't the polished, media-trained Emma who charmed late-night talk show hosts with witty anecdotes. This wasn't just another celebrity interview about upcoming projects or red carpet moments. This was a soul crying out from behind the golden facade of stardom. Emma Stone sat across from Oprah in that intimate setting that had become sacred ground for truth-telling. The La La Land actress, who had danced her way into America's hearts and waltzed away with an Oscar, was about to reveal the panic attacks that haunted her between dance numbers, the social anxiety that gripped her throat during acceptance speeches, and the crushing fear that everyone would discover she was just pretending to belong. "Emma," Oprah said softly, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that had unlocked thousands of hearts before. "Tell me about the girl behind the spotlight." And that's when Emma Stone's carefully constructed walls began to crumble. She had been 7 years old when it started. Not the acting, that came later as an escape. The anxiety came first, creeping into her Phoenix childhood like an unwelcome shadow. While other children played freely at recess, little Emily, she hadn't become Emma yet, would hide in bathroom stalls, her small chest tight with inexplicable fear. "My mom would find me sometimes," Emma continued, her voice growing softer as she reached deeper into memory, "curled up in my closet at home, convinced something terrible was about to happen. I couldn't explain what, just this overwhelming sense that I was in danger, even in my own bedroom, where I should have felt safest. I thought everyone could see through me," Emma told Oprah, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I was wearing a costume that didn't fit, and any moment someone would point and say, 'She doesn't belong here.'" Oprah leaned forward, recognizing the universal pain behind those words. She had seen it in presidents and paupers alike, that core wound of feeling fundamentally flawed, essentially unworthy. The panic attacks came without warning. Emma described them to Oprah like sudden storms in a clear sky. One moment she'd be fine. The next, her world would tilt sideways. Her heart would race, her palms would sweat, and a voice in her head would scream that she was about to die, or worse, that everyone would see her falling apart. "I developed this elaborate system," Emma continued, her hands unconsciously demonstrating the grounding techniques she'd learned. 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear, 2 I could smell, 1 I could taste. It was my lifeline when the world felt like it was dissolving around me. But the real revelation was yet to come. Acting became her sanctuary, but also her prison. On stage, Emma could be anyone, except herself. She could channel characters with confidence she'd never possessed, speak lines with authority she'd never felt. The irony wasn't lost on her. The girl who felt like a fraud had found her calling in professional pretending. "When I got to Hollywood," Emma told Oprah, "I thought the anxiety would disappear. I thought success would cure me." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Instead, it got worse. Now I wasn't just afraid of being found out. I was terrified that my entire career was built on everyone's mistake. Oprah nodded, understanding flooding her features. She had walked this path herself, carried these same fears through her own rise to prominence. "Success doesn't heal our wounds, honey," she said gently. "It just gives them a bigger stage." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she recalled her early auditions, the bathroom panic attacks before meetings, the way she'd rehearse casual conversations in mirrors, afraid her natural awkwardness would leak through. She'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read rooms, constantly monitoring everyone's reactions, searching for signs that she'd said or done something wrong. "I remember my first big audition for Superbad," Emma said, her voice taking on a vulnerable quality. "I was so nervous that I threw up twice before walking into the room. Then I spent the entire audition convinced that Seth Rogen and Michael Cera could smell the vomit on my breath. I was certain they were just being polite when they laughed at my lines." She paused, shaking her head at the memory. The irony is that anxiety probably made me funnier. I was so desperate to deflect attention from my nervousness that I became hyper-aware of comedic timing. The breakthrough moment came during La La Land filming. It was the scene where Mia, her character, bombs at an audition and runs off humiliated. Director Damien Chazelle called cut, but Emma kept crying. Real tears mixing with character tears until she couldn't tell the difference. That scene wasn't in the original script the way we shot it, Emma revealed, her eyes brightening with the memory despite the tears. Damien saw how raw I was getting and he just kept the cameras rolling. He later told me that my breakdown was so authentic because I wasn't acting anymore. I was just letting 15 years of accumulated rejection and self-doubt pour out through Mia's story. She took a shaky breath. For the first time in my career, my anxiety wasn't something I had to hide from the character. It was the character. That's when I realized, Emma told Oprah. I wasn't just playing a character who felt like a failure. I was finally expressing how I'd felt my entire life. Ryan Gosling, her co-star, had found her in the parking lot afterward, still shaking. He didn't try to fix her or offer empty reassurances. He simply sat beside her in silence until the trembling stopped. That moment of witnessed vulnerability became a turning point. The first time Emma felt truly seen without judgment. Ryan later told me something I'll never forget. Emma said, her voice soft with gratitude. He said, "Emma, you think your sensitivity makes you weak, but it's actually what makes you extraordinary. I've never worked with anyone who could access emotions the way you do." That was the first time someone framed my anxiety as a gift rather than a burden. You know what changed everything? Emma asked Oprah, and for the first time in the interview, her voice carried strength instead of shame. It was therapy, not the Hollywood kind that focused on career management or image protection, but real, messy, uncomfortable therapy that forced her to confront the frightened 7-year-old still living inside her chest. Emma spoke about Dr. Sarah Martinez, the therapist who never once told her to think positive or just breathe through it. The first session I spent 45 minutes apologizing. Emma laughed, shaking her head at the memory. Apologizing for crying, for taking up space, for not being better yet. Dr. Martinez just sat there patiently and finally said, "Emma, what if we started by not apologizing for being human?" She told me something that shattered everything I believed about myself. Emma said, her eyes now bright with unshed tears of gratitude, rather than pain. She said, "Emma, what if your sensitivity isn't a weakness? What if it's exactly why you can touch people's hearts the way you do?" The revelation hit Oprah like a physical force. In 30 years of interviews, she had rarely heard such profound self-acceptance voiced so clearly. Emma wasn't just describing her journey through anxiety. She was redefining what it meant to be human in a world that demanded perfection. Emma began to speak about the Oscar night differently than she ever had in previous interviews. Yes, she had won. Yes, she had given a gracious speech. But what the cameras didn't catch was the panic attack she'd had in the bathroom 20 minutes before her category was announced, or how she'd gripped her clutch so tightly during the ceremony that her knuckles went white. "I remember looking around at all these incredibly talented people," Emma said, her eyes distant with the memory, and thinking, they're going to realize they made a mistake. Even holding that statue, even with the entire Academy validating my work, I felt like an imposter who had somehow fooled everyone. "I stood up there holding that statue," Emma told Oprah, "and I felt like the biggest fraud in the room. Here I was, being celebrated for my authentic performance, and I felt like I was lying to everyone who had voted for me." But then something shifted in Emma's voice, a warmth that hadn't been there before. The healing began not with grand gestures or Hollywood magic, but with small acts of radical honesty. Emma started telling friends when she was having bad anxiety days, instead of canceling with fake excuses. She began speaking openly about therapy in interviews. She stopped apologizing for needing accommodations on set when her anxiety spiked. "I realized," Emma said, looking directly into Oprah's eyes, "that my anxiety wasn't something to overcome. It was something to understand. It was my nervous system trying to protect a little girl who once felt very unsafe in the world." Oprah wiped away a tear, recognizing the profound wisdom in Emma's words. This wasn't just about anxiety or Hollywood or even success. This was about the fundamental human experience of learning to love ourselves exactly as we are, wounds and all. Emma's voice grew stronger as she shared her most recent revelation. She had been working with a trauma therapist who specialized in highly sensitive people. Together, they discovered that Emma's anxiety often spiked, not because something was wrong, but because she was absorbing emotions from everyone around her. "I'm like an emotional sponge," Emma laughed, and this time the humor was genuine. "I walk into a room and immediately feel everyone's stress, their excitement, their disappointment. For years I thought I was broken. Now I understand it's actually a superpower. It's why I can connect with characters so deeply." Oprah's eyes widened with recognition. "That's what we call being an empath, honey. You're absorbing the emotional energy around you. No wonder you felt overwhelmed. You were carrying everyone else's feelings on top of your own." The conversation turned to Emma's recent work choices. She had started saying no to projects that didn't feel authentic, even when they offered massive paydays. She had begun choosing roles that challenged her emotionally rather than ones that simply showcased her comedic timing. "I want to use my platform to tell stories about people who feel different, who struggle with invisible battles," Emma said. "Because when I was that scared 7-year-old, I needed to see someone like me succeeding, not despite their sensitivity, but because of it." Emma's passion became evident as she described her upcoming projects. She had partnered with several mental health organizations, quietly funding therapy programs for young performers who couldn't afford treatment. "The entertainment industry can be brutal for sensitive souls," she explained. "I want to be the person I needed when I was starting out, someone who says it's okay to ask for help, it's okay to have bad days, and it's okay to be human in an industry that often demands perfection." Oprah asked about Emma's advice for young people struggling with similar challenges. Emma's answer revealed the depth of her transformation. "First, find your people," she said without hesitation. "The ones who don't need you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Second, get professional help if you can. Therapy saved my life. And third, remember that your struggles don't make you less than anyone else. They make you uniquely qualified to help others who are walking the same path." As the interview drew to a close, Emma shared one final story that left both her and Oprah in tears. Recently, a young fan had approached her at a coffee shop, shaking with nerves. Instead of the usual request for a selfie, the girl whispered, "Thank you for talking about anxiety. It made me feel less alone." She couldn't have been more than 16, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I saw myself in her, that desperate need to know that someone else understood. I gave her my therapist's number and told her that asking for help isn't giving up, it's growing up. When she hugged me goodbye, I felt like everything I'd been through suddenly had meaning." In that moment, Emma told Oprah, "I realized that all those years of feeling broken had led me to this, to being able to offer hope to someone else who felt exactly like I had." Oprah reached across and took Emma's hands in hers. "You know what I see when I look at you?" she asked. "I see someone who turned their deepest wound into their greatest gift. I see someone who learned that being enough has nothing to do with being perfect." Emma smiled, and for the first time in the entire interview, it reached her eyes completely. "I'm still learning that every day," she said. "But for the first time in my life, I'm excited about who I'm becoming instead of terrified about who I'm not." There was a pause as both women absorbed the weight of that transformation. Then Emma leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgency that hadn't been there before. "You know what I want people to understand? Anxiety isn't a character flaw. It's not something you get over like a cold. It's part of how some of us are wired, and when we learn to work with it instead of against it, it can become our greatest strength. Every role I've ever booked, every connection I've made, every moment of genuine empathy I've felt, it all comes from the same sensitive nervous system that used to terrify me." The cameras stopped rolling, but the conversation continued long into the afternoon. Two women, different in many ways but united in their understanding that our struggles don't disqualify us from love. They often reveal exactly where love is needed most. As Emma prepared to leave the studio, she turned back to Oprah one last time. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me." "Thank you," Oprah replied, for letting yourself be seen. And in that exchange, millions of viewers would find permission to do the same. To stop hiding their struggles and start honoring their stories. To understand that being human isn't about being perfect, but about being courageously, authentically themselves. The interview would go on to become one of Oprah's most watched episodes, not because of scandal or spectacle, but because it reminded everyone watching that healing is possible, that anxiety doesn't have to be a life sentence, and that our greatest pain often becomes our most powerful purpose. Emma Stone had entered that studio, carrying the weight of decades of self-doubt. She left carrying something far more valuable, the knowledge that she was exactly enough, exactly as she was.